Welcome back. We're now going to talk about the second key question around value in understanding strategy. Recall the first question was how do we create value? We're now going to focus on the capturing value piece of it. You've seen this diagram before, and the triangle here represents the value that is created by your business. The value that gets captured refers to the profitability piece. On this diagram, I've identified here the margin. The margin is the difference between the price that you sell your products for and your cost. Think of that as being the average price and the average cost, if you like. So that the profitability of your business is this green shaded rectangle in the middle of that diagram. Notice, first of all, that the value that is being captured, or the profit of the business, is a subset of the value that's being created. That whole triangle represents the value created, and the rectangle is merely the part that's being captured. In this case, there's a pretty distinctive rectangle there that's being captured by the business. But one challenge that often happens in strategy is businesses for whom their ability to obtain margin is dramatically limited. And so the downward pressure on prices means that the profitability may be reduced to razor-thin margins and a very low level of value capture for the business overall. So the conversation around capturing value is a conversation around how do we maximize the size of that green shaded rectangle? What factors are under our control that can lead us to increase that? That's what we want to focus on right now. Notice as well that we're not in reality limited to charging a single price. So one of the very interesting topics in the marketing literature concerns segmentation of the market. If we had a way to be able to charge high prices to our high value customers, low prices to our low value customers, you can see how a market segmentation strategy would allow you to capture a much greater fraction of the value that's being created. And in marketing, there's a lot of interesting examples around how firms can go about doing that. That's a conversation around how can we capture more value given the value that's created to our different customers. We're not going to go into any more details on that here. But let's come back to what is it that fundamentally determines the ability of a firm to capture a high degree of value. And in strategy, we like to distinguish between two very important factors that influence value capture. On the one hand is industry attractiveness. These are factors at the industry level that affect profitability for all firms in the industry. These are things like how easy is it for new firms to enter into the market? How powerful are the suppliers to the market? And we'll talk about industry attractiveness and the Porter's 5 Forces framework in more detail shortly. But these are factors that affect profitability of each individual firm as well as all firms in the market or industry as a whole. The second factor is your firm's strategy. How does our strategy allow us to achieve a higher level of profitability, to capture more value than our competitors in the same market? One of the most useful insights of strategy is to make the distinction between industry factors that influence your ability to capture value and firm-specific factors that influence your ability to capture value. We're going to talk a lot more about the industry attractiveness in the next video. What I want to focus on right now is the second of these, the firm strategy piece. And critical to firm strategy is competitive advantage. And if strategy talks about one thing over and over and over again, it's the importance of having a competitive advantage. What does it mean for a firm to have a competitive advantage? There has to be something that the firm does which is valuable, first of all. Either it's lowering cost than your competitors, or you provide a higher willingness to pay than your competitors. It creates value. A competitive advantage must create value for your customers. But, and just as importantly, it must be hard to replicate. And this is the one question in strategy that we focus on tremendously. It's one of the most fascinating questions in strategy. How is it that what your business does to create value for your customers is hard for other businesses to copy or replicate? We distinguish between two ways in which it's hard for others to replicate. One way is because you have legal or scale protection. A classic example would be patents. If you invent a new drug, you have a brand name which gives you copyright protection, legal protections that prevent other firms from doing what you do. It could also involve the ownership of a natural resource or a mining site or a particular great location for a restaurant in a given area. These are all legal protections. No other firm can come in and copy what you're doing because you are the legal owner of that asset that can't be copied by others. Scale protection is similar. The fact that your business is so large gives you benefits, say, of scale economies. That also makes it difficult for other firms, for smaller firms, to be able to copy your low-cost competitive advantage. These are types of competitive advantages which are really clear, and the protection is a clear legal protection or a protection of position in the market due to your scale. But there's a second fascinating category of things which make it hard for others to copy you, which are organizational capabilities. And in strategy, we talk a lot about organizations having key competitive advantages in the capabilities of things that they do. This could be a capability around designing products, around providing low-cost services, around creating incredibly high-quality services that you provide to your customers. A good example would be Walmart. Walmart is very low cost. Now today that comes a lot from their scale, but historically, even when they were at a much smaller scale, they were lower cost than many of their competitors for reasons that were related to internal organizational capabilities. There wasn't any legal protection or patent that prevented other firms from providing the same level of low-cost logistics that Walmart was providing, but yet there's something about that organizational capability which makes it hard for others to figure out as well. This is where we spend a lot of time talking about the importance of tacit knowledge or complexity in organizational capabilities, all things which create causal ambiguity. You can look at what Walmart does or some other organization does and know that there's nothing stopping you from copying what they're doing, but at the same time realizing that it would be very, very difficult to figure out how to do that yourself. Now, that's not a guarantee that at some point in time other firms won't figure out how to do that as well, but the difficulty of copying that capability makes it hard to replicate and creates a source of competitive advantage. And there's many, many examples in strategy and business where we talk about how organizational capabilities that are hard for others to replicate provide an important source of competitive advantage and hence allow firms to capture a high degree of value. Let's talk about an example of this in practice. The print media industry over the last 10 to 15 years has been decimated by the internet, as this diagram shows. On the horizontal axis here we have data from 1995 through 2009 showing the advertising revenues for the traditional print media industry. The yellow bars here where we see this dramatic decline since around about 2005 shows that traditional media has suffered tremendously from the rise of the internet as captured by the blue bars here. This is an industry which has been the traditional print media industry which has been devastated by the internet. That's affected all of the firms in that industry, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Time Magazine. It's an endless list of traditional print media companies that have really struggled as a result of the rise of the internet. So from the point of view of industry level factors, you can see that this industry as a whole has had a major strategic challenge over this time frame. But there's one company in this space that's been doing perfectly well, and if anything has been increasing in their success in this market, which is The Economist magazine. We're all familiar with The Economist magazine as being something that's a fairly intellectual, highbrow source of political and economic news from around the world. And they emphasize this in their branding. Here's some of the kind of provocative advertising that The Economist has produced over the last 5 to 10 years. This is one of my favorites. If someone gave you a penny for your thoughts, would they get change? Another, perhaps my most favorite, is this one. Would you like to sit next to you at dinner? So as you can see and as you know, The Economist magazine has long tried to position itself as being about intellectual, interesting, you're a smart person, people like to be seen carrying The Economist, all of these kinds of things. But The Economist is not unique in that way. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, these are also considered fairly intellectual, highbrow forms of traditional print media. So it must be about something more than just having the brand image of being an intellectual source of news, since that doesn't seem to be particularly distinctive to The Economist, although arguably they are probably one of the best at portraying that image. And so strategy scholars have asked themselves, what is it that's unique? What's the competitive advantage that The Economist has that's allowed them to succeed in an industry which has been decimated by the internet? The answer is very interesting. First, people recognize that The Economist isn't just about reporting or gathering new facts. Facts and the gathering of facts has become relatively commoditized with the internet. You can obtain new facts, whether it be from Twitter or from blogs or from the numerous number of online news sites. It's very difficult to distinguish yourself as a source of new facts. The Economist has never actually been about providing new facts. They don't provide a scoop on a new story. That's not the reason that people get The Economist. It's also not just about opinion. Sure, The Economist provides a certain viewpoint, and we'll talk about that in a second, but mere opinion alone is also in abundance on the internet. There's an endless supply of blogs and other commentators talking about what's happening in the world. So the competitive advantage can't just be that they're commenting on the facts or providing opinion about the facts. Instead, The Economist does something that's very distinctive. They provide a form of analysis. And it's a very distinctive type of analysis. Certainly, it's very market-oriented. One can debate whether it's relatively right or left-wing politically. Certainly, it's very liberal in its viewpoint. But above all else, it's a very free market, pro-market, capitalist type of view about what's happening in the world. And what The Economist does is it reports facts, but provides context and analysis for how you should think about those facts, giving you the ability to be able to interpret what's happening in the world and participate in conversations with your friends and colleagues at work or at dinner parties, as it may be. There is also this piece about there being no bylines. One of the things that, whether by conscious design or not, that has served The Economist well over the years is that none of the articles that appear in The Economist are attributed to any particular author or journalist, which of course means that authors and journalists don't develop their own brand names and their own ability to capture value from The Economist. Those people who write the articles are in some sense more commoditized from The Economist point of view, but yet they all write in a style and execute a type of analysis that's really definitively known as the Economist way of doing things. And what seems to be the case is that this style of print media, of a certain kind of analysis, is something that even with the growth of the internet and all of the other content that's available online has remained distinctive. It's creating value for customers, people care about it, and it's actually quite difficult for others to be able to copy. So to recap, how does our business capture value? Well, let's note that capturing value is a subset of the value that gets created. So of course you need to create value in order to capture value. Firms, however, may create a lot of value, but struggle in capturing very much of that. You have to have a strategy with a competitive advantage and operate in an industry which allows you to obtain significant margins and profitability from providing that value to your customers. Competitive advantage is the distinctive aspect of a firm's strategy that allows them to capture value in ways that other firms in their industry might struggle to be able to achieve. And for something to be a competitive advantage, it must be both valuable and hard for others to copy, as the example from The Economist provides us with. Up next, we'll talk about industry attractiveness in more detail. This is, of course, one of the other major determinants of being able to capture value.